Welcome on board, everyone. Today we have a panel about the business of selling your business, how to pique interest, attract buyers, and of course, close the deal. And we have some fabulous panelists here. Of course, my name's Joanna Oakey. I'm the Managing Director of Aspect Legal, and we deal with buyers and sellers all day, every day. We have Lucia Vuong, the head of Seek Business. Now, that's where all of this advertising for businesses happens, and Lucia will be talking all about that. And of course, Simon Bedard, the CEO of Exit Advisory Group. Hi guys, welcome on board to the panel today.
Hi Joanna, and hi Simon. Great to be here. Really excited to be part of this.
Absolutely.
I know. So, look, it's such an interesting topic, obviously a topic that is dear to all of our hearts. I guess, Simon, why don't we just kick off with your sort of, introductory thoughts about why this is such an important topic for us to be covering right now? What are some of the issues for sellers as they're looking to get ready to sell their business?
Yeah, well, look, I think if we just start at the most basic principle level here, right, is that fundamentally we all exit our business one day, whether we like it or not, right? And so now exit doesn't always mean selling. Sometimes there's a succession plan and family business and multi-generational things. But, more and more we're seeing that as being lesser of an option. I mean, there's so many choices these days. So for most business owners, their exit plan will involve some sort of transition and them handing over ownership and, of course, the management of their business. And so I think whether you want to sell your business in the next 12 months or you're not even sure if you want to sell it and you're planning to be around for the long term, thinking about your eventual exit plan makes a lot of sense. And of course, if selling is going to be the viable option, then really you should give some thought to maybe who is the best potential buyer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Simon. I think it's a really important thing for business owners to think about their exit. I think sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable for people, but we see at Seek Business a lot of people coming to us probably a little bit late in the piece, in that they kind of expect to sell in a month, like selling a house. But it just doesn't happen that quickly, and they're not prepared for some of the conversations and some of the things that need to happen to make that transition smooth. So understanding what their plan is, but also understanding what types of buyers out there is absolutely crucial.
I totally agree with you there, Lucy, because one of the things that I always say is a quick deal is a good deal, because the reality is getting this momentum in a deal is often that decider about whether or not you're actually, you've actually will find a buyer that will make it through to exchange, and then of course through to completion, actually buying the business, coughing up the money at the end of the day. But the thing that I find is sellers so often just don't know how to prepare. They don't know what the process looks like, and they're just not ready to go. And so they miss buyers when they're starting on this process of selling their business without actually having understood what it means to get ready and what the process will look like.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, Joe. I mean, I think, the finding of willing or open or interested buyers is actually not necessarily the problem. It's a mismatch between buyer and seller expectations. And so I think this idea of understanding what your business is worth and why it's worth that is absolutely critical. And, it's the old thing, right? But sellers usually overestimate the value and buyers usually underestimate the value. And, somewhere in the middle, we're trying to bring people to an area of consensus where everyone can kind of live with the deal. It's, rarely I think do you ever see either party going, whoopee, we got the deal of a lifetime. It just doesn't tend to work like that.
I think you're both spot on. I think a key part of that is what we see is sellers not really knowing what they're selling, like what is the actual kind of value, as you said, of the business. Is it actually tangible assets? Is it the fit out you've put into the business, or is it actually something less tangible, like the customer loyalty that you have or the brand that you have? And the problem with that is it's really hard to attract buyers when you don't know the strengths and weaknesses of your business. And we believe that what tends to happen in ads, what we see in job ads, is people only talk about the good things. And that's great. Like, of course, you want to sell the best things about your business. But what you should be saying is actually having a think about, I've never been very good at marketing, and I still made this very successful business. Maybe somebody who comes in with some really great marketing experience can take this to the next level. And thinking about the buyer in that way as like, what are the opportunities for growth in your business is something that we see people miss a lot. So it's kind of just taking that step back a little bit early to go, what exactly am I selling? What are the gaps that I have but have still managed to make this work? And what could someone else bring that really kind of makes a transaction happen, really? That's when inquiries happen, because people see, oh yeah, I've got 10 years of marketing experience, and this business already has in place the systems and processes that maybe I'm not so strong at, or they've got a great management team that can do the things that I'm not so good at. And that's kind of the magic, right?
Yeah, Lucia, I think I love that idea. So, what I'm paraphrasing or taking away from what you're saying there is, for sellers who are using a platform like Seek, and frankly, if you're going to use platforms, use the one that's the biggest and got the most volume and does the right thing. So, but if you're going to be advertising your business, how can you speak to the right kind of buyer? Define what they might look like, where 1 + 1 might equal 3 or more, right? And then speak to them in that advertising, speak to them in the way you present your business, so that you're not trying to speak to 1,000 people. You're just trying to find those few that resonate with your message, right?
Absolutely. And it is like, it's really hard because sometimes buyers don't even know what they're looking for. So what we find is, especially if you're a first-time buyer, people tend to look for things they're familiar with. So cafes and restaurants always do really, really well. But we do find that people are kind of scrolling through, looking at lots of ads because they're not entirely sure what they could do. And so highlighting those kind of areas of opportunity are really great. And the other thing we've seen is there's been a shift in the type of buyer on like that's coming to look for businesses. Before COVID, the typical trend was that when unemployment was high, that was when we'd see a lot of buyers come through. And if unemployment was low, buyer interest would decline. Now that's completely flipped since COVID. And the reason is, I think before COVID, a lot of the market that was looking to buy, especially in the lower market, so say under $300,000 or $500,000 businesses, a lot of them were looking to buy a job, really, because they couldn't get into the job market. And we're actually seeing a lot more of the opposite now, which is people who through COVID either have built up some cash or have had some great salaries, because salary growth has been amazing over the last couple of years, actually really thinking about finding something fulfilling and finding kind of something that they want to do to give them the type of life that they imagine for themselves. And so this is a totally different type of buyer who's thinking about, what do I want to do day to day? And if you don't tell them that in your ad, then they have to make it up, and that makes people scared, and then they don't inquire. And so you've got to paint the picture for people about what they're doing day to day, so that they can make that match of, that's what I want to be doing. That's what I'm great at.
It's funny you say that. They say, I always explain to, when we're representing a client and a seller who's trying to move their business, I'm always saying to them, it's human nature that when there's a lack of communication around a particular part of your business or just life in general, whenever there's a gap in communication, humans instinctively fill that gap with the worst conceivable sort of imaginable outcome, right? They just assume the worst, right? And so whether you're buying, selling, whatever you're doing, I mean, you have to be clear about what it is that you're achieving or what it is that you're selling, and so that people aren't having to guess and make assumptions.
The one thing I'd throw in there as well is, it's this, absolutely agree, you need to understand what it is that you sell. What's the value in your business that you're selling? Because that's what buyers are buying. They're buying this value, But how does that value transfer to them as well? And that is one of the critical things that I find sellers don't often think about. And that's where we see this issue where buyers come in and they feel that there's this risk that the whole value in the business sits in the founder or the owner, the seller themselves, right? And then it's, how is it that you as a seller, and you really need to be thinking about this as you're prepping for sale, how is it that you as a seller show that value is something that will continue on in the business, and that the buyer will be able to not only achieve in the business, but then capitalize on, and Lucy, as you were talking about before, then add growth on top of it as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's that whole risk and opportunity really being flip sides of the same coin. And so, buyers, their greatest fear is I'll buy this business and it'll stop working, right? The money will stop coming in, and then, oh my goodness, I've bought a dud. And so that's all the risk that they won't continue on and be able to achieve what they want to achieve. But also a little dash of that optimism around, well, maybe if I could grow this thing, I could achieve a hell of a lot more. So it's a unique sort of path you've sort of got to weave, I think, in these types of negotiations.
Yeah. And I think,
I mean,
sorry, Lucia, go ahead.
No, go for it. No, you go ahead, Joanna.
No. Do you know what? I've lost it anyway. Okay. Luckily, they'll be able to cut this bit.
The editor will cut it.
That's okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that it kind of goes back to your earlier point, Simon, about really starting earlier and some of that extraction of the value from the owner needs to happen before your ad goes up. Actually, a lot of things need to happen before your ad goes up. And that's why, when we're talking about the ad itself and how you attract buyers, most of the grunt work happens before that, because we find that sellers come to the ad and they look at, the box that says describe this thing or tell us this thing, and they don't know. They don't know the answer because they're busy running their business. And, a lot of people ask us, should I get a broker? Should I do it myself? What should I do?
Yeah.
And of course, the answer is that depends. A lot of people can do it themselves, but we strongly advise, at the very least, get some professional advice around, valuation, around legal advice, around, just helping you make sure you're doing all the right things. Yeah. But that preparation piece, it's key, because until you know, exactly what to put in the ad, all that work happens earlier, and we can't change that once you've created the ad. You've created an impression of the business already.
It's a funny one, isn't it? I think it's the Abraham Lincoln quote that if you've got 6 hours to chop a tree down, spend the first 4 hours sharpening your axe, right? Get ready for the action before it starts. And I think, picking up on one of your previous points, Lucia, about what people are selling, I think even at its most basic level, and Joe, I'm interested in your view on this, is, am I selling assets or am I selling shares? And I find too often business owners wait till they're deep in a transaction, deep in conversations with buyers, before they bother going and getting tax or legal advice around what that looks like. And it's, oh my goodness, that to me is a little insane, because it's, that outcome there could make a material difference to what you get in the hand once you're finished your deal. So, Joe, you must see some interesting case studies around that.
All the time, literally every single day. Literally yesterday afternoon, I had a discussion with a client that I'd spoken to, a month or so, a few weeks ago earlier, when they're getting ready to sell their business. They'd found a buyer, right? And I said, great, let's get the contracts ready. Now, just before we do that, have you checked tax on this? Have you, and a few other dot points of things. And they said, back to you in a moment. They went off, spoke to their accountant. Do you know what they told me yesterday? Because of that one discussion that I sent them off to have, they're now saving $880,000 in tax. $880,000. Can you believe it? And they're still they were doing a business sale right in the beginning. They're still doing a business sale, but they just needed to do a few things in the business just beforehand. And this is representative of so many other things. So yes, tax we're talking about right now, and tax is easy to point out because it's such a, easily quantifiable saving or risk. This, in this instance, they would have done the deal if I hadn't have told them they needed to go and get that full advice, and paid $880,000 more in tax than they needed to. But that's just one of a list of things. And to pick up on your point, Lucy, I really love the concept that before you put the ad in place, get all of this information, get yourself prepared. And I think another massive reason for that, other than, as you say, it can be difficult to amend things or change listings further on, it's really because when you're putting your business on the market and you're getting inquiries from buyers, and buyers are hot right then, they want to buy something. And if they make an inquiry with you and you don't give the information that would be expected at that point for you to have ready, or you give it in a way that is incorrect. There's ways to provide information that reveal your business properly, and there's ways that maybe just shine a light on a whole heap of things that maybe you didn't really intend to lift the hood on so early in the business. So get it ready, get it clean, but understand what it is that the buyer is going to be looking for in that information that you're providing. And that comes back to, the financials are pretty obvious, but often there's a whole heap of other things that sellers just don't understand. And you want to be in the situation where buyers are contacting you and you're ready to go. You've got that information, you're handing it across, and they see your business as a well-run business that's clean. Because if they don't, buyers get concerned, they pull back, they slow down, and you risk losing a deal. Lucia talked about this sort of move in the market to an increasing, essentially a lifestyle business buyer. I guess that's, that's the reality of what we call them. Most of those buyers have never bought a business before, and what you need to do is instill confidence in them in this process so that because anything that makes them think twice will make them step back, slow down, and get concerned about the transaction.
And it's risk reward, right? Or risk valuation here. The higher the risk, the lower the valuation. The more return they need on their money to compensate for the risk. It's a simple thing. And once people form these opinions very, very quickly, I think, like Lucia said, reading the ad, right? The decision of whether I bother inquiring or not is probably made in less than a second. You read the ad, decision made. And so you've got to make that first impression, make it last. Then the next step is each step in this process, you are not selling them your business. You're selling them the idea that they should invest more time in this process and take at least one more step with you.
Yeah, I think you've both hit the nail on the head. Like the buyer first impression and the buyer experience is also something that a lot of sellers don't think about or don't really kind of consider. And it kind of blows my mind because these are business owners who are usually amazing with customers in their business, and they're not treating the buyer like a customer. Yeah. And if you think about it, this buyer is, buying something that is probably one of the biggest purchases in their life, like compared to your house or, your car. It's really in that realm of emotional, really high investment, really high risk, as you said, Simon, and any kind of little thing will make them step back, as you said, Joanna. So we always say, and going back to that question of should I do it myself or should I get someone else to help me do it? The first question is, do you have time? Yeah. Do you have time to respond to an inquiry straight away? Because as you said, Joe, like as soon as the buyer goes cold, they go cold. And that fear is something that we talk about a lot at Seek Business, because we know that almost half the Australian population wants to be a business owner, but only like 13, 14% of us do it because it's so scary. And so anything you add to that's friction, that gives them a reason to not do it, they're going to take that. And things like not having your the right information prepared, but also treating the buyer a little bit kind of like just a bit cold, like not kind of welcoming them like you would if they came into your store or your business, and not building rapport and just treating it really transactional. What we've seen is sellers asking so many very invasive questions very quickly and really scaring the buyer off. Like, how much money do you have in the bank? How big is your mortgage? Have you done this before? And if this is their first inquiry, they're like, I don't know you from a bar of soap. Why would I tell you all these things? And it's kind of this Mexican standoff, because it's like the buyers also expect the seller to just give them all their financial information.
Yeah.
And so I love this event and the content that, both of you are putting out, because we're trying to educate the market that, hey, you need to kind of take the right steps at the right time. You can't expect people to tell you everything in the first conversation. And, there are processes in place that you should follow. So it's just, it's kind of just taking a different perspective to actually treat buyers like a customer.
It's not meant to be adversarial, right? And I think that the thing is, people get defensive about their information, and there's buyers and sellers, right? Oh my goodness, this person's going to try to sell me a dud, or this person's trying to rip me off, and don't default to the negative and the most worst conceivable outcome, their adversaries. Understand that deals actually only ever get done with a willing buyer, willing seller who form a lot of trust in a short period of time. And that's actually quite hard to do. So if you start on the wrong foot, it's quite hard to recover and actually bring them back to the table and build that rapport that you were talking about, Lucia.
Yeah, it's we see it every day. We get buyers who call us and I've made all these inquiries, nobody's getting back to me, and we've had sellers that tell us that buyers are not willing to sign NDAs, and it's just it's a big challenge in the industry because the will is there. Like, there are a lot of people wanting to buy and there are a lot of people wanting to sell. And it's like you said, Simon, finding that match is quite difficult. But it is about the human interaction.
Yeah, 100%.
Building rapport, building trust.
100%. Quick, you mentioned NDAs there, Lucia, and I think that's a really interesting point because obviously it's a sort of standard document, I think, that everybody expects to be signed. But there's not necessarily anything standard about NDAs, right? Like, they can be really, really different. And I've seen a few now, and Joe, I'm once again interested in your perspective on this because you see some NDAs out there that are just so ridiculously overbearing, and you just think, how could you possibly expect someone to sign this? Like, you're basically tying their hands behind their back for the rest of their lives. It's, like, once again, how do you get people to take a step?
Yeah. And I guess these are all the sorts of things that, sellers who don't have that deal team around them to help give them advice of like what's normal in the market versus what's not can put themselves in a bit of a difficult situation, and there was obviously there's so many points that you've really pointed to, Lucy, that I think are absolutely the case, not really knowing how to deal with buyers, not knowing how that dialogue should really go in order to engage the trust of the buyer, not having the documents ready because you don't really know what you're meant to have ready, all of that sort of thing. But I think really, I lost my train of thought. What we were talking about before, I thought if I kept talking, it would come back.
No.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
NDAs, yeah.
But the same thing for NDAs as well, right? Because anyone can go and rip an NDA off, and that's the thing, Google an NDA, you can get an NDA. Most people have no idea what sits in these NDAs and what they're actually asking, and I think that's a real issue at the point if you're asking buyers to sign something that's ridiculous, because you're already starting on a really bad foot. But it's just one of a series of things that is important for you to understand, or at least have people around you who understand.
And to further that too, Joe, I mean, and disclaimer here for everybody listening, because I've worked with Joanna over many years and multiple clients, and so we have that benefit of some working history. But I've always seen, and I always encourage my clients to make sure that not only you use a good lawyer, but use a lawyer who does business, sales, acquisition stuff all the time, right? Because I find there's a lot of lawyers out there, and no offense to, present company Joe, because, we know each other, but I know lots of lawyers who'll go, yeah, I can do a contract. I do contracts all the time. But if you're not doing business sale contracts every day, I would suggest to anybody listening to this, find a lawyer that does, because there's so many nuances, so many little traps for new players that if you're not understanding and using your term here, Joe, how things are typically done in that industry or for that type of business, then there's a good chance that your deal's going to blow up on you, and it's not going to happen. Because I just find, to their credit, most lawyers will say, I want to do a good job for my client, which means burrowing down and eliminating every conceivable risk there is, which makes the contract so onerous that nobody would sign it. And of course, then all you do is end up bashing heads with the other side until the whole thing just explodes. So find somebody who knows how to help you navigate the right outcome, and that means, yes, protecting you from risks, but also understanding what things you can give away because they're not really going to cost you so much, but maybe the other side values it a lot. And it's that kind of intelligence I think you're looking for.
Yeah, and of course I'm horrendously biased here. but I'd say also, you need people, I mean, people who work, lawyers and accountants, your whole deal team who work in this area regularly, because, it's the same thing for many other advisors who might pop in and out but not work on these sorts of transactions on a daily basis. But it's that systems and processes, and it's the, having that clarity in place of what is market standard, what's not market standard, so you can move confidently. I just think that's sort of critical in this area. And we deal with lawyers all day, every day, obviously, on the other side. And there, I can tell you, it's a fragmented market here in Australia for lawyers for SME business sales and acquisitions. But you can see immediately the lawyers that don't respond for 4 weeks. That's because they're overwhelmed by all of the risk that looks like it sits in these contracts. But in reality, when you overlay our commercial imperatives, we've got some clear ways to deal with this stuff. And that's what you need to know, right?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Can I just I'd like to raise, you mentioned process, and I think it's something that I want to raise as a little bit of a trap that I see out there that most business owners don't often see coming. And that is the way that you typically engage. And I'm going to speak from the seller's perspective here because I tend to represent sellers more often, and is not understanding or having a clear, robust process to actually put buyers through. And regardless of where your buyer comes from, if they're coming off a platform like Seek and coming through the marketplace, or whether, and this is the classic old one I see a lot of, somebody comes in and just gives you the proverbial tap on the shoulder, right? They've approached you, you weren't thinking of selling even. And of course, the first thing that happens when somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, oh, look, would you be interested in selling, is that you get this massive big head because all of a sudden the ego's stroked and you're like, oh, wow, well, somebody's interested and isn't this lovely? And, sometimes I think we switch off that part of our brain that is actually probably a little bit more logical and processing information in a better way. And I think when you're not ready to go through a transaction, and yet the buyer is, what ends up happening is the buyer puts you through their process rather than you putting the buyer through yours. And so, as everybody here listening to this would expect, the buyer's process is designed to get them a better outcome, not you. And so if you actually don't know what you're doing, if you don't have clear steps, if you don't know what type of conversation you're meant to be having with that buyer and how to move it forward in a reasonably, sophisticated and collegiate kind of way, then you're going to have troubles. And the amount of times I've had clients come to me saying, Simon, I don't think my business is sellable because I've been through this 3 times and it keeps blowing up. I'm like, no, you just keep making the same mistake every time and you're not doing anything different. So anyway, you must say that sort of stuff, Lucia, all the time.
Simon, you just made me think about the process also helps you make sure that, you're doing whatever you can to get the best outcome possible. Because, so for example, people like, if somebody taps you on the shoulder and you're like, great, and maybe they have a price, you hadn't even thought of a price and they offered you something and you think that's great, and you might want to take it. What we would advise is if you don't have a team around you, find some professionals to help you actually value your business, talk about what the terms should be, all that kind of stuff. But also, and I might be a bit biased here as well, but advertising is a really good way to know whether, you're getting value for whatever you're selling.
Yeah.
And I'll give an example. I was speaking to a very successful owner of a laundry business. So she ran 3 laundromats, very, very successful, but she was heavily pregnant, very tired of running this business for almost 15 years. And one of her customers said, hey, I want to buy this business. And she was like, I'm kind of tired. Maybe I should just take it. And when she talked to me, I said, why don't you, talk to a couple of brokers, talk to some advisors, put the ad up. It doesn't cost that much. Like if you're running $1 million business, $400 or $500 to put an ad up is not a lot of money.
Yeah.
And just see if you can get some competition for that as well. And just kind of test the market to see if what they're offering is actually in line with that market. She didn't do that, but I had another customer who came through, advertised with us and didn't sell through Seek Business, but she said she was bought out by a competitor because they saw the ad on Seek. So that's another case where unless people know you're serious about selling, they might not come forward. And so until you actually put your business out into the world and say, hey, we're serious, this is what we think the value is, you're not going to get a real true value of your business because the market determines the value. Your business is worth what someone is willing to pay for it. That's what it's worth.
Yeah. I love that. I love that example, Lucia. And given we've opened this door, I've got a question to ask. I'm interested in your view on to advertise price or not mention price, right? This is the eternal question. I was even in the US at a broking conference recently and kicking around with other advisors. They're going, do you list price or not? And so even advisors in this sector are tossing up different strategies for different sellers and all the rest of it. But do you have a view on whether it's better to signpost or set some expectations around pricing in your advertising, or to more sort of seek the expressions of interest and that type of approach?
I think it really depends. So typically speaking, if you show a price, you will get more inquiries because people, as we've talked about a lot in today, they're very risk averse. So not knowing a price is one more friction barrier to buyers that they just makes them a little less willing to inquire. But I do think if you have a very high value business, there is a reason to kind of put an EOI or a price on application out there, because you're going to get not very many inquiries anyway. Like the number of people who can and are looking for those high value businesses is relatively small, and they're more informed, like they're more educated. They've got usually not a first time buyer, or they have advisors helping them. And so it's less of it actually helps you kind of weed out some people because if they're not serious, then they won't inquire.
Yeah.
But if you're in the lower end, definitely put a price. Like if you're anywhere in the 300-500, even up to that $600,000 business, if you don't put a price, you're just missing out on the buyers who are likely to inquire. That's what we're seeing in terms of inquiry volume based on what price you put.
Thank you for answering that. I think it's such an interesting one. And as you say, it's sort of a horses for courses approach, right? Because I've found with some of our listings that we've posted on Seek, and it might have been a sort of $2 or $3 million business that we're sort of expecting that price range. We didn't put the price because we thought it might scare people off. But of course, we've described the business in all these sort of wonderful things that we're doing. And all of a sudden, you just got overwhelmed with potential buyers, but actually weren't in the price range. And so in the end, we've actually, as a team, we've had the lead broker advisors go, guys, we need to change the ads, put the price up. We need that as a filter. This is like, there needs to be some line in the sand, right?
Yeah, and that's setting expectations as well. Like that's always helpful. So it depends. Like so many things, it's really important that for your business, it's the right decision, and it depends on the team that you have behind you who can kind of filter those inquiries.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Coming back to, I guess, our topic around, obviously the business is selling, but how to find buyers. I mean, Lucia, you tapped onto some of the previous cycles in the past, high unemployment, things like that. But are there other sort of indicators that you guys see at Seek that give you an indication of the size of the market or the level of activity out there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we have a lot of data here at Seek about the labor market, so around the people who are in employment and out of employment. And as I said, it's a fairly atypical time. Like it's just a very strange time right now. What we're expecting is that there's this, the economists keep calling a softening, which is we've had a lot of jobs, really low unemployment for a long time, and that is softening. So we saw, unemployment went up a little bit yesterday. It's, who knows what will happen next month, but we're not expecting it to keep going down. And I'm really interested to see how that shifts the buyer market for us, because what I hope will happen is that the shift in priorities and the shift in why people want a business, that's just more like a light that's clicked on. So the working from home thing, that's pretty typical now. I don't think we'd ever go back to a world where people are 5 days in the office everywhere. I kind of feel like that's the same for us, in that I think people are thinking about their careers very differently. And that's what we talk a lot about at Seek, is careers and what makes a fulfilling and productive working life for people. We actually did a survey back in February, so not that long ago, asking people, are they interested in owning a business? And if they are, why? And the number one factor in Australia for people is for more freedom. And the number 3 factor is to be in charge of my career. And I find that really interesting because the 3 of us know that owning a business is a lot of hard work. So this concept of freedom, I think, is less to do with I have more time. It has more to do with I choose. I choose to do this thing for myself. I choose to do this thing for my family. And it's kind of like, going through COVID, the mandates. When someone tells you you have to do something, you don't want to do it. But if you choose to do it, it's a totally different mindset. I think that mindset is here to stay. So I think people like having more autonomy. They want to shape their career in different ways. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is I think that being a business owner is not not on the opposite side of having a corporate career or anything like that. If anything, it's intertwined and you can do both. It's of course not in every job and every business, but I think the possibilities are opening up. There's just so many more tools, so many more things out there to help business owners to live this kind of really fulfilling and life that they shape themselves.
I absolutely love that. It's interesting. I was on a panel yesterday with Glenn Carlson, who's also part of the summit from Dent, and he made a comment there, which I think really resonates with what you've just said, Lucia, is that there has never been a better time in history to be an entrepreneur and a business owner. Never before have we had the kind of information, the kind of tools, the kind of support, the kind of advisors, the access to information has completely been democratized. It's, yes, there is always going to be some risk, otherwise there'd be no reward, but geez, there's never been a better environment for managing that risk. And, I think, Joe, curious on your side of things too, because I know you represent a lot of buyers as well, but there must be some more steps, talking to somebody like yourself, for example, to get their head around some of these risks if they're thinking of buying, to wrap their head around it so that they're comfortable with it, right? You're never going to sleep at night going, oh, there's no risk in here, but hey, there are risks, but I know how to deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, pause. Sorry, you I paused for a second there. Can you just quickly tell me, you were saying buyer risks, getting on top of buyer risks, that was it?
Yeah, so buyers coming in, so how do they kind of de-risk this scenario so they're more comfortable to take a step? Yeah.
Yep. I love it, Simon. The one thing I just want to throw in before I talk about that whole de-risking element is this opportunity for buyers. We've talked a bit, obviously we're talking about preparing for sale today, but also about buyers. But this opportunity for owning your own business, as opposed to buying a business, as opposed to starting from scratch, because that quite often becomes the decision point. And I just want to say that I think there is such strength in people who are looking to move out of corporate, looking to do something different, but moving into something that's a proven business model. And that's ultimately what buying a business is, right? You're buying something with a history that shows that this works, because it's that issue, that idea of, will I have something that the market will want to buy, that I think is one of the biggest risks in business, that is hard for people who aren't business owners to really understand how to prove or validate unless there's an operating model, sitting there. And I think that's what buying a business offers. And obviously buyers, people understand that. Obviously, Lucia, you can tell that by the activity of buyers on your website. I imagine a lot of them are people who are thinking of this ownership, but then, are fearful about the risk that they're taking on. And I'll talk about risk in 1 second, but I just want to talk about one other statistic that I think is fascinating. And I saw this statistic just a couple of days ago. Apparently, and we all hear about this glut of businesses that's about to hit the market, because we're hitting this retirement age of business owners. But the statistic now is that in the next 5 years, 70% of businesses are going to change hands. 70% of businesses
Wow.
are going to change hands, which I think that is mind blowing. But I think it's like, obviously it's a huge opportunity for buyers if you can get your head around the risk. But, and there's ways to deal with that risk. And I'll talk about that in a second, but it's also a risk for sellers. You know, we talk about the risk for buyers, but the risk for sellers is that you sit there for too long in your business before selling it. Number one, that you aren't primed for sale, that you miss the prime of the business because you've lost that energy and enthusiasm for it. You know, you sell it when it's well come off its prime rather than when it really is in its prime, and a buyer can see that you're in growth rather than decline. But I guess the other issue is, in holding off, are you going to be caught in this glut of businesses that are for sale? You know, so I just think it's really important from a sell side to think about timing. And maybe let's talk about that first, and then I'll come back and give some tips on buy side protection.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I'd love to pick up on that, because it's something we see all the time, is when vendors come to us and they're thinking of selling, even those that are giving themselves a little bit more time, which is, I love to see, give yourself a bit of runway. But often what invariably happens is people start to prepare for sale, which means they start tightening up operations, they start improving things and streamlining them. And, 12 months down the track, they find themselves in a scenario where the business is running better than it's ever run. And all of a sudden they get all excited about the business again. And sometimes that gives them unrealistic expectations around valuation. So we need to be careful of that. But also the fact that they start to question whether they actually want to get out. And look, don't get me wrong, I'm the first person to say, if you love your business and you've got a long time horizon and you don't want to get out, then don't get out, right? It's about what you deeply want, you deeply want. But I always sort of think you actually want to get out when your business is absolutely performing really, really well. And the market is not necessarily at its peak, but it's certainly it's approaching the peak. You want to leave a bit of blue sky for the next person who's buying it, but get out when the times are its greatest. Probably the time where you're so happy that you don't know whether you want to sell. That's the time to sell.
Yeah. I love this. I love this theme because we really look at supply and demand on the marketplace. So. And I think one of the things that surprises us is sellers don't realize that, if there's a lot of businesses that are very similar to yours, then that actually devalues your business because buyers have a lot of choice. But also on the flip side, do you know if there are a lot of buyers for the type of business that you have? And are you setting your expectations for that? And it's things that are hard to kind of predict, but it is also common sense as well. Like when we looked at throughout COVID, all these businesses that had been shut for a long time and they needed to get out for different reasons, but they all kind of flooded the market at the same time. And so that reduces the value of them, whereas the things that were there weren't as many. And it's been really interesting to see people looking for more boutique kind of unique businesses. So specialty retail is a business, an industry that's in our top 10 that's really grown a bit. Coming out of COVID, people thinking a lot about lifestyle, as you said, Joe, and so sports and fitness businesses kind of boomed. But it's also different in different states. So because Melbourne or New South Wales and Victoria suffered such strong lockdowns, things like sporting businesses, hair and beauty businesses didn't grow as much as they did in like WA, SA, Queensland. And so you've got to kind of know and you can see it. Like you can just do a search on our website and see how many businesses are similar to yours. And if you see a lot, it's probably, there's a lot of supply in the market. So, everyone here is in business, what supply and demand does to business, does to pricing. That's what it's going to do to your business.
Yeah. And I think the other element is as well as considering, getting ahead of this glut that I talked about before and some of these market movements that, Lucia, you're talking about, you may not even be able to predict because, of course, we don't know what's around the corner tomorrow, just like we didn't see COVID happening but before it happened. good businesses will ultimately sell though. And so that thing is you have to think about, well, what is a good business? And putting yourself in the minds of a buyer, what is a business that looks low risk, that looks like it's got value, that looks like it's got value that can transfer. And all of these things just sort of like sound like headlines, but there's actually dot points behind it all in terms of how you actually do that. And I guess this dovetails into this, you know, how does a buyer protect themselves against risk? And just, you know, it's the same, it's the viewpoint that a seller has to have, because a seller needs to understand what a buyer is going to be looking at to protect themselves from risk in the transaction. The risk is that what they're buying is not what they thought they were buying. They're not going to extract the value that they priced the business at as a buyer. And there's lots of, you know, mechanisms for a buyer in relation to what that looks like contractually. So there's a contractual and a legal answer to it. But there's also the way that you structure the deal. But then as you, and you know, that can really help with risk allocation between the buyer and the seller in the process. But it's also about ensuring that there is this, what is the value and how will that value transfer to me? For example.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Did I cut out there?
You're fine. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. Actually, I just, you know, following on from your point there, Joe, I love this idea of sellers putting themselves in the shoes of a buyer, right? Because first of all, it helps them to start breaking down that adversarial approach, because you start to think and empathize with the other party and how they might be feeling. But the second part about that is how you start to perceive the value of your own business, right? And of course, value is a function of the risks and all the other things. But it's, and you know, I actually had a situation with a client of ours. He was in the renewable energy space, and look, he'd been doing his own homework and shopping around, and you know, he was trying to tell me that his business should be a 10-time multiple, you know, 10 times my profit. And I sat down and I said, so like, where did you get this number from? And I've had a few people tell me, you know, and I'm thinking, yeah, they're not people who are selling businesses like yours. I can, you know, think of that much, but. Anyway, but to help him make this transition and think more like a buyer, I simply asked him, if you were going to buy your own business, how many years would you be willing to wait for the business to pay you back your money? Right? Basic ROI. How long do you want to take to get your money back? And he goes, oh, well, I'd want my money back in 3 years, you know, maximum. And I'm like, okay, so that's a 3 multiple, you know, like, and just to watch the penny drop as he realized, oh my goodness, I've just completely, you know, misunderstood how this whole thing's going to work. So, okay, maybe your business is worth more than a 3, but it's not going to be worth 10. And so somewhere in here, we need to find that middle ground that's logical, makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, and definitely talking to other people, and you know, your friends and family can be helpful, but also sometimes they're your worst enemy, because it's like, you know, when we watch Australian Idol, right? Your friends and family are never going to tell you that you're a terrible singer. They're not going to tell you the real perspective. And actually talking to an advisor, talking to someone who has done this before, just getting that perspective of the buyer is absolutely crucial. So I love that, Simon.
Joe, have you frozen again?
What's going on? This is killing me. I don't know.
Probably you're getting the same thing, the same problem I was getting, Joe. It's why I was just saying to Lucia before you came on, I've got NBN coming in and installing fibre to my house because my uploads can't handle the quality of the video and all that stuff. It craps itself. So
I'm uploading at 99%. I have no freaking idea what's going on, but it's driving me bananas, and I am sorry, because it makes it very hard to speak, doesn't it, for everyone? But we're almost out of time anyway, and I'm like, huge apologies. I'm sorry. This doesn't usually happen. I'll speak to my computer after this. I tell you what, I'm having serious words with it. But why don't we just do one sort of rapid fire? I'll just say, look, you know, we're running out of time. Let's wrap it up. Let's do a rapid fire. And what's the key? I think it's just like, what's the key message we're leaving
Key takeaway, yeah.
Key takeaway. Okay, look, we're getting to the end of the time for this panel. So I guess just in wrapping it up, I think it'd be useful if we all just do a run around, and talk about the key takeaway we think is there for our audience from the things that we're talking about today. And I'm going to take the first one, possibly the most obvious. Everyone in the audience is going to say, we got it, but be prepared. Like, you really just need to do the work to get prepared before sale, because if you throw yourself onto the market just saying you'll just give it a go and see what happens, you're going to end up doing it incorrectly and a poor job. So, do the work to understand what a buyer's looking for in your business, tidy it up beforehand, get it ship shape and ready to respond to buyers' inquiries really quickly. Okay,
That's
who
awesome,
wants to go next? Who's taking the baton?
I'll go next.
Go for it.
I'm going to steal your last point, Simon, and I think really think about the buyer's experience and think about it from the buyer's perspective and build that rapport. Like, this is not a chocolate bar you're selling. This is something emotional. This is big. So, build that rapport quickly and make sure that you're on the same page with trust and transparency kind of key. So that's my takeaway.
Yeah, awesome. And look, following on from the theme here, but maybe digging a little deeper on one point is understanding your buyers, right? I mean, it's all part of planning and prepping. We typically go through a market mapping exercise where we're trying to understand strategic buyers, financial buyers, lifestyle buyers, who's who in the zoo, right? Who is the right kind of buyer for you? And then how do you go find those buyers? And certainly solutions like Seek and marketplaces are going to be really critical to you. But like everything, it's, unless you know how to drive the vehicle and you know how to get the most out of it, you're probably going to not get the outcomes you want. So getting into the head of the buyers, mapping the types of buyers and building that into an overarching plan, like Joe said, is really it for me.
Brilliant, team. Well, thanks for all being here and thanks to you, our audience. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.